Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a good lunch. I figure some folks will be joining us as we go, but since we have limited time, we'll go ahead and get started. If you are here this afternoon and you're here to talk about tribal climate adaptation menu, that's the session. If not, maybe you better look at your agenda. So the goal of this session is to try and acquaint you with the tribal climate adaptation menu and some of the folks who worked on it, some of the folks who have used it to plan projects. And then we'll start to think about how using it and creating it has influenced the way we do what we do, how using it has changed the projects that we work on, and then maybe some goals for the future. My name's Croll. I'm the Climate Change Program Coordinator for the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm coming to you today from northern Wisconsin, 1842 Ojibwe ceded territories. I was going to introduce all of my panelists, but I think I'm just going to let them do that in any way, shape, or form that they're comfortable doing it. Talk about who you are and where you're from and what you do. So why don't we start with Jerry and Katy, move from there.
Okay, I won. Bonjour, everybody. Good to go. Bonjour, Nindigenous Communities. Can do them. We quite on can do Jabano Jibwe Anishinaabe Indian Dao. My name is Jerry Jondreau. I'm a member of the Keweenaw Indian community in the Western Upper Peninsula of Michigan. One of the co-authors of the Tribal Adaptation Menu. Leave it at that.
Bonjour, Kinaria. Mangi dote, Miss Kobe Konga Dunjaba, Makunziban and Baba, Ban and Shnabe when Kazuban, Ninsa Zigunikwe and Dishnikas. So hello, hi everyone, welcome to the session. I'm a Loon Clan member from the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, and I sorry about that. My name's Katy Bresette. I'm also co-author with all of our wonderful, folks here on the Dibaginjigaadeg Ainishinaabe Ezhitwaad backgrounds in Ojibwe education. But as of late, then I moved up here to Michigan, working here for Dynamite Hill Farms, working on getting back to the land and back to these places, and very blessed to have had some time in language and culture and spending time back with our non-human relations here here in Anishinaabe King. So I don't know whose turn it is next.
Popcorn
Sara, because we can see your face.
Segu squakwegu, Sara Smith Yungiats. Onioteaga na iyo kalewagwahoni wagalooda. So, hello everyone. I'm Sara Smith. I'm the Midwest Tribal Resilience Liaison with the College of Menominee Nation and also our event host for this summit. And I am one of the co-authors for the TAM as well. And I live over in St. Paul, Minnesota on the traditional lands of the Dakota and Sioux people. And I'll pop it over to Chris.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you, or at least your names. I don't see a lot of cameras. And I'm Chris Swanston, work for the Forest Service. I lead the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. I am happy to be one of the TAM co-authors. I'm joining you today from Houghton in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and traditional lands of Anishinaabe and Sioux peoples. Thank you. Oh, Kat.
Bonjour, Indigenous Techtmannn. I am speaking to you from also the same area as Rob, the 1842 ceded territory in northern Wisconsin. I work as an environmental outreach state specialist for the University of Wisconsin Extension, and I am a user, learner, and lover of the TAM. I'll pop it over to Yvette.
Hey. Hello, everyone. Jondreau. I'm Yvette Wiley. I am Muskogee Creek, and I'm coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Within my tribe's reservation now, after the McGirt ruling, which affirmed that we are still within our tribal boundaries. It is not our Aboriginal home. Our Aboriginal home is in the southeastern part of the United States, what is now Georgia, Alabama, northern part of Florida, in that region. So it was really interesting the last session I was on, and the plant session, and talking about, that cultural connection, because we're not on our Aboriginal home. But I am a user of the TAM. I was in, I believe, the first workshop, and I have found it so beneficial. And I got to apply some of it to a small project that I did when I worked for the Iowa tribe. And I worked for them for 5 years. And previous to that, I worked for my own tribe for 13 years. And I'm getting ready to start a job with the Uchi Butterfly Farm, but on the nonprofit side of it. So the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. And I'm going to do that for a little bit and see what happens after that. Thanks.
Well, thanks, everybody. I will acknowledge that my name is also on the Tribal Climate Adaptation menu, though most of the folks on here contributed way more than I did. And there are also a number of our team members in the audience here today. So I invite you, if you have a need to speak out, we certainly want you to do that. I'm going to turn it over now to Sara, who's going to guide us through our slide presentation before we get to a panel discussion.
All right. So I also invite the other authors to jump in when they would like to as I go through this. This is going to be a very brief introduction to the TAM. So the Tribal Climate Adaptation Menu, as it's called, or we just say TAM for short, came from this need for a menu that highlighted Indigenous knowledge, culture, perspectives, worldviews. So the background to this is some of our TAM authors attended a workshop that NIAX puts on with one of their menus that they had. And at these workshops, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, many people bring a project with them to work through the menu. And so at this workshop, they brought a project regarding wild rice. And so during this workshop, they realized that there was this need for a tribal menu focused on Indigenous perspectives and knowledge. And so that was the very birth of the TAM. And so over a little over 2 years, we as the author team, which is a very large group of us, put our heads together and came up with this amazing menu. I'll also point out, so this is the cover of our TAM. Katy is the illustrator for the image you see here. And so for the TAM team itself, like I said, we are a very large group. And so we come from many different places, mainly across the Midwest, which is currently Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin for the most part. And the authors are represented here. And so we come from many different backgrounds, many different knowledges, and it was really great working with this amazing group of people to bring this together. So I think I hear people talking, but I'm not sure. Are we good? Okay. And so how will climate change affect tribes? This is a very large question because there are many different sectors that climate change is affecting, outside the natural resources realm. But for this, we're talking about those non-human relatives for those who were in the plant relative session or the water relative session previous to this one, tribes depend a lot on these relatives to meet their spiritual, ceremonial, medicinal, subsistence, and economic needs. Like mentioned in earlier talks, these are our elders. And so we need to learn from them, like Robin said in her keynote, and listen to what they're saying. And so this tribal adaptation menu came together to make sure these needs and perspectives were highlighted and announced. So if we take a look at the forest adaptation menu that NIAX created beforehand and compare it to the tribal adaptation menu, you'll see a difference in perspectives or a difference in paradigm. And so, for example, with the forest adaptation menu, there's a strategy in there that says prevent the introduction and establishment of invasive plant species and remove existing invasives. So one of the approaches is to eradicate existing populations or seed sources. And this was talked about, a question like this was brought up in the plant session for those who were in it. And so in the tribal adaptation menu, we took it in a different direction. And so the strategy we put in the menu is to maintain or improve the ability of communities to balance the effects of non-local beings. And I am a very novice beginner with Ojibwe language. And so I'm going to hold off trying to tackle this one for now. But the approach on here is to remove existing non-local beings after communicating with the beings in the local area to explain intended actions. So very similar, scope of focus for, invasive plants or non-local beings, but two very different perspectives on how to go about that. And so we can definitely talk more about this when we go into questions. And so one thing that is unique to the tribal adaptation menu is that we start with these guiding principles. And Katy, I don't know if you or Jerry maybe want to talk more about this as well. I can just say what I have on here right now. These guiding principles are meant to help integrate Indigenous and traditional knowledge and culture and all that that comes with it into the adaptation planning. And it helps guide non-tribal partners to work in Indigenous communities. And so this menu itself is written from an Ojibwe / Menominee perspectives, but it is intentionally designed to be adaptable to other Indigenous communities as well, to integrate their customs and their culture and their language, really focusing on empowering these tribal communities.
Yeah. I think one of the things to keep in mind, the guiding principles, most especially, was really foundational to a lot of the work when we began developing this this menu. These guiding principles, not only were we using them as we were going through this process and having these conversations, that, as Sara said, it comes right at the beginning, and there's a longer section than I think a lot of people are really used to when you start reading through something that's considered a tool such as this. And I think the word foundational is very important when you think about something like these principles. We've discussed in other presentations and have shared in other presentations that when coming, the point of the menu itself is to help people who are from perhaps a Western point of view or a Western background in understanding mainstream understanding, to understand that the tribes need to be able to when we're having these conversations, the tribes need to be able to be that foundation. This conversation needs to be rooted in the understanding that comes from that place. And so these guiding principles were really designed to help frame the rest of that conversation. And I think that's all I would really need to say about that, unless Jerry's got something to add.
I was just going to say from experience in my past, I was a forester for the Keweenaw Indian community, started the first tribal forestry program here on our reservation, and in trying to work with other agencies on projects or having discussions about exercising our treaty rights in the Forest Service within national forests, I found myself repeating over and over again some of the things that they should be considering, and maybe how to approach the tribes in a good way. And so we felt that having some sort of guiding principles like this would be very helpful for some of those non-tribal agencies, and even some of the tribal ones too, to get a little bit of a background understanding of good ways to approach tribes. And this is definitely more from, like, I guess, an Ojibwe perspective, but to try and save some of that time up front of explaining these things before you engage, because it takes up so much time before you can even start having those real conversations about collaborative work and things like that. So I think it's pretty important. And I think maybe another point to mention too about the guiding principles is that for those non-tribal entities or agencies, we feel it's very important that tribes are the main driver, if not one of the main drivers in each one of these cases, so that we're not only just having a seat at the table, but we're actually steering the project. We think that's really important. So that's kind of built into the guiding principles as well, and not just some consultation one-time meeting and then walk away and never speak to them again, but actually have the tribes really help steer everything. So,
and I think the beauty behind this project is not only is it something that can be not just Ojibwe or Menominee, and can be changed, and Yvette can speak to some of how this was applied in the project she was going on later on when we have this conversation in the panel, that it can be something that is authentic and true to not only the wider range of what people would term tribes, but even specific to place. So what's happening in Red Cliff is going to be different than that's what's happening here in KBIC, is going to be different than what's going on down in Menominee or in Lac du Flambeau. And I'm being very Wisconsin biased. I apologize. I usually am.
Typical.
However, the idea that this is a flexible document that allows for something that's written down, something that you can refer back to and use that as a reference point for those of us who are very well educated in the Western mindset and understanding of, it's got to be in a document for it to be a real existence. It still has that flexibility built right into it. And these guiding principles help explain and show and guide, quite literally, through those steps, through those strategies, through the adaptations that it brought forward, the flexibility that we've really tried to instill in this. So yeah, I think that's it for us. Miigwech.
Yeah, and it really helps to for non-tribal partners to really start understanding the Indigenous paradigm and things like respect and reciprocity and relationships and what it means to be a non-human relative, things like that. And so we could talk about the guiding principles for a long time. So that's just a very short intro. And so, thinking about these beings on the landscape as relatives and not resources is really important when we're doing our work on the land, because we're making these decisions for our relatives, for our elders. And from a tribal perspective, these decisions were made communally through, recognition, acknowledgement, reciprocity, and relationships, and not so much as a lot of management is done today, where it's made by individuals or an agency or an institution. And it's meant towards a resource to extract and to use and use up, and not seeing them as who they are as beings and relatives in our communities. And so we touched on that we also put on workshops. And so we started our workshops in January of 2019, so just before we officially published the Tribal Adaptation Menu. And that was up at the Cloquet Forestry Center in Minnesota, where Yvette joined us. And then our last one was actually March of 2020, before everything came to a halt. And we had that up at the Northern Great Lakes Visitor Center up by Red Cliff and Bad River communities. And so these workshops have been really great. They've brought a lot of people together. Some, like Kat, who's on our panel today, has been to more than one because it's just that awesome. And and we can talk more about this too, but this is just showing, some of the people who we've interacted with these workshops, and that we do have very young ones, part of our team as well. It's really important to remember the youth when we're doing our planning and who we're doing our planning for. It's for that next generation and those to come that aren't here yet. And so I'm going to kick it to Chris really quick to talk about kind of the framework of how these workshops usually go.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, let's see where to start. I'll start way back, but I won't do a really slow crawl forward, but I'll just jump back for a second. Originally when our group, NIAX group, started working with folks about climate change, we thought we were going to come up with a guide for how to do things. You're here, you want this, so do this other thing here. And that failed pretty miserably. And so we, learned from that and started trying to do a much better job listening. The first thing that we heard was that people didn't really want to be told what to do. They just wanted help addressing this issue, and they needed it to really be about them and their own goals, which of course makes perfect sense. We eventually arrived at this this process here, and it's in many ways a classic Western approach called adaptive management. But if you just get past that, it really makes a lot of sense of just grounding yourself in your objective or what it is that you care about and value in a place. And in this case, the beings who are in that place with you. And then think about how climate change is affecting the whole region. And we can have all kinds of scientific analyses of that and trends and projections. But to really step down how climate change is affecting that place, and how you think it may continue to affect that place. And again, the beings who are there. Now, when we created this, we were thinking about classic climate change assessments and data and scientific papers. And, but also as we started working with more tribes, it's local knowledge, it's traditional ecological knowledge, it's their way of knowing for that place going back generations upon generations. And that is just such a deeper knowledge than anything you can find in a scientific paper. And so again, this process still worked. And then you think about what it is that you value in that place, what it is you care about still. And now, given the changes that you anticipate and what you know about that place, how might what you value and what you care about be affected? And are there things that you can do differently in the way that you interact with that place and the beings that are there? And so again, in a classic Western approach to forestry or ecosystem management, we would say at that point, all right, you've considered threats to your objectives, you've considered threat to the system, now you're going to adjust your management actions. That is what adaptation is. And then you're going to look at your actions on the ground, and we would like you to use these adaptation menus to link the action on the ground to a broader adaptation intent. So what is it that, what is the adaptation pathway that you're going to take to get to your objectives and goals? So it was in this workshop that Sara was talking about, and I can't remember if it was Tansy or Robin who brought this up, but you know, we were asking about the menu that they were using in their project, and one of them said, well, referring to the menu, this just isn't how we would have written this. And you know, I'm standing up. He said this to me, standing up in front of 50 people. My stomach sinks. You know, I start feeling a little defensive. But of course, I was asking the question for a reason, and I got a wonderful, honest answer. And so then the next question becomes, what would it look like if you were to write it, if it were to represent you? The whole point of these menus is that they allow people to express what it is they want for a place and how they want to interact with that place in language and terms that make sense for them, that the people who they're talking to can understand. And what we had created wasn't working well enough for the people that we were wanting to serve. And so, you know, that the conversation that came out of that was really all about exactly what Sara and Jerry and Katy set this up as is, well, what would that look like? How could you express just how it is you want to live with this place and its beings as the climate changes? And so, you know, we put this together. It was a long process where I think everybody learned from each other. And ultimately, the workshop structure that we had built around this process, you know, was intense and linear as the process itself originally was. And I think these guys are going to discuss, you know, more about how the process that allows people to interact much more deeply with the TAM, what that looks like, and how they can come out of that with actions or actions that are really more about not taking action, you know, what those look like. Sara, am I stopping there? I think I yapped on for a while. I think I said everything you wanted, right?
I can take over.
Okay, good. You take over.
Okay. So yeah, with these workshops, these are, we've gotten it down to 2.5 days is the time frame of these workshops. And so our first day is really talking about these guiding principles, doing an intro to the menu, and then doing steps 1 through 3, as you see on this image here. And then day 2 is mainly set up to use the menu. So this is where step 4 is, bringing in the tribal adaptation menu and creating our posters. And then day 3 is our wrap up, and step 5 on how do we monitor and evaluate effectiveness, and what does success look like for the different projects. And our workshops have evolved a lot since the beginning. We've only had 5, but they've evolved quite a bit. And so we incorporate a lot of different things into these workshops that currently makes it, we've tried to do them online as a workshop, and it just doesn't work for the kind of setting and work that needs to get done with these projects. And so we normally open up the workshops in a good way, similar to what we've done for our summit this week. And we incorporate a lot of hands-on activities too. So it could be you know, having people make these posters like the one on the right that show people's artwork. So it's not just, you know, lists of words, but making a visual representation. We've incorporated different kinds of mediums and materials like clay, all sorts of things. And then we are also trying to incorporate more time outside as well. So one of our workshops, we actually got to go to Woodhenge, which is at the College of Menominee Nation, and be outside around a fire while we're opening up for the day and sharing reflections. So these workshops have been really great. We try to have it where it's about 30 people or less, so we can have really intimate groups and build those relationships with the people that we're working with. And so far, there have been 35 projects across the Midwest, Northeast, and beyond. So like I said, these workshops have evolved quite a bit because we have projects coming from Florida or Oklahoma, places where, you know, the author team isn't originally from, but the menu is set up to be adaptable. So even though we don't talk specifically to sea level rise, like those in Florida are dealing with, we can still use the menu to help. And so we've had other projects as well where it's not natural resource management, but maybe an education program. And so two of our folks from our workshops are on our panel today, Kat and Yvette. And we have 2 slides talking about their projects as well. And, you know, we'll let you guys talk about them more in depth. I don't know if you wanted to do just a quick blurb about your project, Yvette, or if you kind of just want me to go over it.
I can, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm going to get started. What you see, the picture on what the screen's far left, that this site is a 1/4 acre site that was initially built, I think, in about the year 2000 by a wetland scientist that was working for the Iowa tribe at that time. And through the years, no one kept it up and it got deteriorated. What she did is she built basically a wetland pond, which is the picture you see on the far left. And there were 2 small depressionals, and it was an educational outreach center. And I was just kind of getting started in this field at that time. And so I remembered it. And in 2016, when I came to work for the Iowa tribe, it was completely deteriorated. And it was something that I wanted to bring back because it was a good site, and I had done my graduate work on wetlands, probably completely different area, but it was just a pet project for me, actually. It was something that I wanted to get accomplished while I was working there. And I wasn't sure how I was going to go about doing that. Nobody seemed to care, but we did get it done. And so when this workshop came up and we needed a project, I had already gotten a small amount of funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife to do this. And so it's what I used as the example when I went to the workshop up in Cloquet, is that right, Minnesota? And, you know, so we did get it done. I don't know how much you want me to talk about it, but I'll save some of the strategies and things. But before I ever got started on it, I used to eat lunch fairly regularly with the elders there in one of the buildings on their tribal complex. And so they knew that I was working on this, or, you know, working toward it. So that was kind of a start. I think some of the challenges was just, well, I don't know when you want me to get into that, but we ran into a few challenges. And one of the things is that I wanted signage with their language. And of course, I'm not Iowa, I don't speak it. And that this is one of the smallest tribes in Oklahoma, is the smallest tribe population wise. And while they do still have members, you know, that practice their culture, they've basically lost their language, the Iowas of Oklahoma. Now the ones up in Nebraska still have some speakers. So that was a hindrance to be perfectly honest, for one of the things that I'd wanted to do. But I'll just leave it at that for right now. That gives you a little bit of the background on how we got started and kind of why I wanted to get this completed while I was there. So
Thanks, Yvette. Yeah, we can get into it more in a little bit too. And then Kat, did you want to talk about your project really quickly?
Good, Sarah. This project is a kind of a sneak preview that you're all getting a chance to see. It's still in design, so things may be changing that are on these slides, but I want to share this with you. This is a project for the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. They had done a climate vulnerability assessment with NIAX and other people in the Lake Superior region to identify vulnerable terrestrial ecosystems. Primarily plant beings, plant and tree beings in the Apostle Islands. And one of the intentions of the original study was to integrate Ojibwa ecological knowledge into that study, which didn't, I don't think, occur in the way that it was originally envisioned. So I was asked to try to develop an interpretive outreach strategy that would do that for the Apostle Islands in a good way. So this project, of course, I went to 2 TAM sessions, one to understand the framework and to get guidance, and then realizing how little I knew and very humbled by the entire process, I went to a second TAM session to get more guidance. This project also was to be an on-the-ground type of project when it started, with education for visitors and students on the ground out in the Apostle Islands, signage, etc. And then we had COVID occur, so everything changed. So what you're seeing here is our development of this project, and I've had a lot of help from members of the TAM, from Glyphwick, from tribal partners that I've been working with, is to integrate Ojibwa Native ecological knowledge with TAM approaches to promote climate stewardship in the Apostle Islands. And the way that we're doing this is web-based. Again, it was intended to be an experiential, place-based approach to understanding climate impacts, integrating Ojibwa knowledge, but that's not possible with COVID. So the way that we're approaching this is using a website, the Minnesan website, Melanie Montano Chimigwech for that, the naming of this website, and the help with others that have contributed. So meaning islands. So what learners will be able to do, whether they're student learners or adult learners or visitors, will be able to actually visit each of these different ecosystems through 360 virtual visits, as you can see there on the screen, by clicking on an interactive hotspot on the website, which will take you to an interactive ecosystem page, which will have 5 interpretive stories. And realizing that all of this interpretation needs to be not Ojibwa ecological knowledge inserted into Western or the academic science that have been developed, but the other way around. The perspectives and everything need to be based on Ojibwa NEK with some Western science or academic science integrated to add additional understanding. So the Minnesan website, the way we've drafted the stories, we're going to be basing the interpretation on 4 orders of creation: physical world, plant world, animal world, and human world. And a 5th interpretive storyline, which is Consider This, which will be a place where we'll interpret places perhaps where NEK and SEK don't necessarily agree in terms of the climate vulnerability assessment, so that users of the website can kind of consider and ponder these things themselves and maybe drill down in some deeper investigations. So we have 11 terrestrial ecosystems represented, plus a 12th one for Lake Superior. So that means 60 interpretive elements will be drafted, and you can see the consultation that I'm relying upon to do this, because I am a learner in this too. But the TAM has been really, has provided the entire framework for this project. And without it, I don't think that we would have been able to even accomplish the first step in this, especially given the virtual nature of it. So I'll turn it back to you, Sarah Miigwech.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, and that's our last slide, actually. So we can go into more of a panel discussion with everybody on here. So I will turn it back over to Rob, actually.
Okay, so while we are waiting for folks to hopefully ask some questions, and I will say that if you have questions, please pop them into the chat, the Zoom chat, as opposed to the Pathable chat. Since Chris is on here and he has limited time, we'll start out with this one. And this is really for Chris and Jerry and Katy and Sara and Melanie and any of the folks that were long-term TAM team. How have your experiences creating the menu and facilitating our workshops changed or modified your perceptions about climate change, about climate adaptation, about working in or with tribal communities?
Well, that's an awful lot. I could go on about that for the whole rest of our time. It's hard to know where to start. It's changed me as a person fundamentally, working with the TAM team. I would say that in some ways, I'm still, of course, the same person. I grew up with a certain set of values, was taught the way I was taught, have been on a certain path for a while. All that's still true, but it's like when I was in college, I remember I was sitting at a table in a library, looking out a window, flirting with a girl. I reached over and picked up her glasses and put them on, and suddenly these green blobs out the window jumped into clarity, and there was this whole richness of focus, of color, of detail that I'd never realized was there. And so I had, needed glasses the whole time, didn't know it. I had been seeing the world as I expected to see it, and suddenly saw something that was much richer than what I had been seeing. That's how I feel this process has affected me. And so a lot of the time, just like wearing glasses, you might not change the path you're walking, but you see everything on that path differently. And you're going to respond to things all day long in every way, just a little bit differently. That's what it's done for me.
I guess I can go next. So for me, I guess this has been a really great project that I was able to work on. I'm really fortunate to be part of it. And I feel like, through these 2 years and now afterwards, since we've published the menu, the author team and those involved with the cohort too, we've just become very close as a really great networking group and friends and such. And it was really interesting because when I was in my undergrad years, I was really struggling because I had to take 2 majors in order to do natural resources and First Nation studies. There was no overlap whatsoever. And in my mind, it didn't make any sense. So that's why, I did the 2 majors because I knew they went together somehow. And I just didn't understand how at the time. So to be part of this project where those 2 worlds were able to work together was just like this ray of sunshine. And I was so happy to see it work. And, with everybody's different perspectives and backgrounds, I think that's what makes the TAM so rich and so adaptable from all of our different perspectives and our knowledges and things like that. So it's somewhat like Chris, I'm still the same person I am, but I'm so much more enriched and thankful for this project and those who have come with it and those we are yet to meet too from future workshops. So I'll leave it short and say that.
Okay, I appreciate those responses, Chris and Sara. And I feel the same as well. I mean, having this group of people was really, I don't know, like a flotation device for me, because being who I am in the profession I was in, I was oftentimes the only person in the room that was sort of mentioning these things or thinking like that, and it can be very lonely. And having this group of people come together and have these really, really deep and rich conversations, and not feeling like an outsider, and being comfortable expressing myself with other professionals and other people that are sort of having these conversations too, was really therapeutic, I guess, in a way. To be able to get these things off my chest, to say the things that have been on my mind for so long, and to be accepted as well, was really, really nice. It's also really nice now to actually have a document that's published, that we can constantly reference people to this document, and it saves a lot of the emotional labor and physical labor too, just from trying to convey these concepts and ideas to people at every single meeting. Like I said earlier, you know, when I was dealing with the Forest Service and different projects, we always had to start at the beginning at every single meeting. And so now we can actually put this in front of them and say, please read this, you know, before we have our meeting, and hopefully, you know, you're starting one step ahead of the process. So yeah, it's been a really amazing journey. I mean, even the conversations we had about language choices and the wordsmithing that we had in those meetings were phenomenal. I wish those were recorded, but being able to articulate some of these concepts using different words in the English language, coming to points where the English language just wouldn't suffice. So we had to really started leaning on Ojibwe and Menominee terms and concepts. So and then actually seeing people like Chris and other people from NIAX and other folks that aren't, you know, from the tribal communities, seeing the light go off was awesome. And I remember Chris, you know, in this process, and you know, we were talking about some of these stories that we have that have sort of guided me in my existence, and you know, repeating these things over and over and over again. And eventually I see Chris reference back to one of those stories in one of our meetings, and I was like, oh, okay, he's getting this now, he's seeing this. And that was just that was an amazing moment for me. And you know, things like that will always stay with me. And really happy to be a part of this team and to see these things happening now and these conversations happening. And yeah, just very appreciative of the entire process.
I think I'll just add to the tail end of that, because I think Chris and Sarah and Jerry all said it oh so well. That's been the beautiful thing about working with a group like this, is you hear your own voice when someone else is talking. And it's very coming from, especially from a tribal perspective, that's not often when we're working in any of our given professions or any of these given institutions. Like Jerry had said, a lot of times you feel like you're the only voice in the room, and that's taxing, right? Emotionally taxing and physically taxing. And one of the things that I have found very interesting about the progression of this, the menu itself and the work that we've done, and as it's continued to kind of expand and explore itself in the wider audience that we've been sharing this with, is this idea that it's not just me working off my sounding board of people who sound the same as me. I work in a tribal community. I've put myself in intentional places where I'm working within the culture and within the language with people that I know and trust, to heal, to preserve, to become someone who is knowledgeable in myself. And the beautiful thing about our group is that we had a place to do that, where there were places where we had to say things that maybe weren't always heard. And that supportive layer, that supportive group, you find that in the workshops that we're doing, and in the ongoing work and conversations that spread and ripple out from what's come from this menu. And I think that space of not just having to talk with Jerry or Sarah or Melanie and things that I specifically agree about and are tribal and tribally known, but being able to work with Chris and Rob and Steven, yeah, and Hannah and everyone who might not be from that community, Kat, you know, where we can start exploring those conversations and helping other people see that this isn't just, we're not trying to just put like barriers on the way of this work. We're not trying to just be confrontational. There's a reason and a purpose for this conversation. And especially right now, so many people are seeking and needing a different conversation. And for whatever reason, this one has been one that has walked itself forward. And to be a part of that is just a blessing in itself.
Yeah, we're the TAM fam.
Yeah.
And that I think that'll always remain. And I think Melanie had mentioned something in the chat because she's too shy to get on here and say it, but we joke with each other all the time. And you know, we had our kid, you know, our children running around and babies in the rooms, and it wasn't awkward. It wasn't like, well, that's not professional, you don't do that, and these sort of stuff. No, man, this is who we are. We're a family, and we're able to have these tough conversations and talk deeply about some of these concepts in Western science that has been accepted, that we were able to challenge and talk about for a while. So yeah, just an amazing process.
NIAC's waiting room becoming our toddler room. That's worked very nicely.
Yeah, kids chewing on scientific published papers and all kinds of good stuff going on. So yeah.
We did have a few more questions in the chat too, so
I just want to give Kat and Yvette a chance to weigh in and your experiences with the TAM and how they've shaped your projects or your perspectives or changed the way you do business.
Can we start?
Yep.
Well, when I went to the workshop, you know, I was quite impressed. It's still, I would say, in my 21 years of being in this field, I'd say one of the best workshops, probably, or at least, you know, and the reason I say it's the best is because it was beneficial to me. And as far as the TAM goes, what's inside that document, I've always basically thought in that same way. So it resonated with the way I was already thinking. But down here, you know, you realize you have 39 tribes in Oklahoma, and we're all but one or two were removed tribes. And I didn't hear that in our vernacular, talking about other beings as our family, even though that's the way I thought. And so when it resonated with me, it was kind of like, okay, thank you. It was an affirmation for one. And it's like, okay, I can speak this way. It kind of almost, even though I didn't really need permission, it was almost like, I can speak to this way and use this language in settings with other tribes and either representatives from non-tribal agencies. And how this also helped with the project I was working on. It was such a tiny little project, but when I first started working over there and I was talking about it, I said, well, what if I go to some of the tribal members and tell them what I want to do? And one of the tribal members says, no, don't do that, because you're going to get everybody stirred up. And, you know, and so you have that, he goes, everybody will start fighting, and you have that to deal with. But I kind of didn't listen, and I was already kind of reaching out to people anyway about the project. So it was just helpful. And it's helpful to have this document. I think someone used the word rich, and it's rich. And you don't, and you know, what I've realized is I don't have to be Ojibwe to use it. I have brought it out, and I'm not Iowa. I was working for the Iowas and I used it, and I'm Creek. But I think I just want other tribes to know, look, this is a really good document here that you can use, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a climate change project. And getting ready, I was speaking with Jane Breckenridge about this, she's the one that started the Uchee Butterfly Farm and the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators here in Oklahoma. but they do, their work is starting to spread out. And we was talking about this a little bit here fairly recently, and it's something that I think I can reference and use in other areas. So that's, I think, what I got out of it. I got out of something that is, I think that if for as long as I'm working, I can be able to use it. And I think that in and of itself, you guys have to pat yourself on the back for what you've done, because it's almost like, because I've had non-tribal people tell me there is no, they go, there is no Western science. They said there's only science. And I was like, oh man, he's really dug in. But I was like, you know, it's like, how do you get through to these people? You know, so. Kat, you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you. After all his wonderful thoughts, I don't know what I could add. I guess just a humbleness. And when I agreed to do this project, I wasn't sure what it was when the Park Service first asked me. My background is in natural resources and environmental interpretation. So I thought, well, this is going to be something similar to our Ginkanu Wiziwe Anjiwaban climate change program. And when I realized what it was, it really kind of humbled me and set me back on my heels thinking, holy cow, this is really important. This is not the way the Park Service has traditionally approached some of the issues or relationships with the tribes around them. This is an opportunity to maybe help be a bridge, or this project could help bridge and strengthen those partnerships. I don't mean to be presumptuous that way about it or my work on it in any way, but I really had to stop and think about it. And I got some excellent guidance from one of the TAM members to go out and pray about it and speak to the lake about it, which I did, and our relatives about it here outside. And that really, and to observe and seek guidance first before moving ahead. And then of course with COVID, that changed things up for many of us on our projects too, which was again, a little bit of a like, holy cow, how is this going to affect this project? Which in terms of this project, I think has turned out to be a real blessing, because many of the places that learners, those place-based experiences that learners could have or could have had, or out in the Apostle Islands would not be possible in person because of distance, expense to get to them. But using a web technology, we can bring learners to those places to see and experience, even though it's in a virtual setting, they still will be able to experience that, and then hopefully go out and have those place-based experiences. So it was very humbling. That the other thing I wanted to bring up that is that being an educational project, I'm hoping that this project will help provide an example of how other extension educators, other educators can use the TAM and use Indigenous knowledges as a way with other sciences to relate to students better, to relate to our relatives better, to issues that we're dealing with, to reveal different sources of information, different knowledges, two-eyed thinking, to provoke action, to provoke in a good way, people taking action on climate change or whatever the issue is, with more holistic knowledges to draw from and more strengths to draw from. So Miigwech, I guess that's all I will say on that. Thank you.
I think we can probably move into some audience questions now. And
Sure.
Casey, why don't you go ahead? Since
Definitely. Yeah. So the first question we got, first and foremost, is say great panel. So great job, everybody. Really awesome. And the question is, has the TAM influenced how climate change adaptation is practiced in non-tribal contexts? I think that was open for anyone on the panel who would maybe like to answer and has some observations.
I would say it's starting. I would say it's starting because this document hasn't really been out that long, and then COVID and like the whole world shut down for a while, and but it's kind of been smoldering in the duff layer, and I think it's getting oxygen again. And I think there's people you like that, Mike, and I think it's starting to get life back. And there's a lot of people, like Katy had said, that are sort of reaching to find another perspective to these issues. And it's just really good timing for this document to be out there. And And hopefully next steps we are able to sort of bring this to a much broader audience and start branching out into different regions. But again, I think one of the biggest impediments to that change happening is that we're really advocating for tribal people to be leads on these projects. And for that to happen, you need to have relationships established. And so right now there's a lack of relationships out there between the non-tribal community and the tribal communities. And so once that gap is bridged, then I think, it'll get a lot more momentum. But I think those are some of the current impediments from that actually happening right now.
I'd like to bring up the point too that Chris had mentioned earlier, the action of non-action, or something about as eloquent as that, maybe more so.
Nice cup.
But the idea that very intentionally not taking action, that was done even with this whole year, we very intentionally have not taken, like Sara had said, this doesn't work on an online format. It is very intentional that we had to step back this year and not necessarily do the workshops themselves and call for these actions outright, but in the fact that the whole world, like Jerry said, has had to hold still, that these ideas have been sitting and simmering in minds and thoughts and hearts for this entire year. And you can hear that call even more so now. What is it that we'll do with this? What is it that we could do with this? What more could we bring to this table? And so the conversations, like Jerry had said, where these relationships have to be built foundationally for this to move forward, that has been given that opportunity. And I think that's part of what has been such a blessing in the intentionality, but like really that we took our time to have these conversations. Jerry talked about the lexicon and the fact that, there were hours upon hours when we decided to have a conversation about a word. And that is so important for people to understand, that the action of non-action, of stepping back for a moment to get kinawabe, right? Our favorite word, to learn through that observation. And to walk that as we've taken that time, as we've started to develop those relationships, then we're able to walk forward with it. So.
Awesome. I think, let me share another question from the chat. And this is kind of a two-part question, but the question is, what are your hopes for the future of the TAM? And kind of a follow-up to that, are there ways that regional partners, such as NOAA, for example, can help to elevate it more?
Yeah, I think Katy touched on this a bit with, outlook for the future and what's happened right now with the pandemic, and us, waiting to have more in-person interactions and workshops with people. I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because these workshops themselves, they are, whenever we have one, they're hosted by a tribe. So we have that connection to the place. And I love all the excitement and I guess I'm blanking on words, but I'll just say all the excitement from, non-tribal partners like NOAA, and other institutions too that want to use the menu or, have a workshop in their area too, to recognize that this kind of workshop is really different from, how the other NIACS ones are put on, because we have certain protocols that we follow for the workshops. And so that influences, what we want to do in the future. Of course, we want to have more workshops and hopefully, First Nation workshops up in Canada, and expanding the TAM internationally as well. And I see those as part of our future. We joke, I joke with Rob all the time that we need to get a tour bus for the TAM fam and have the touring TAM, where we go for our workshops and things like that. And I have visions for it, but that's a future outlook. And hopefully we can continue doing this work. And then, we also want to expand our group as well to have more facilitators and moderators. Because our group right now is, somewhat big if you think about the number wise, but for all the requests we're getting to, we want to be able to support more requests in the future and build our base as well.
Well, and there was a comment I just wanted to mention a part of, and thank you, Melanie, again for sharing about the TAM fam. Just wanted to share what she said, as well as, how important this is, because, prior to the TAM, it was a struggle learning about, technical and scientific pieces of climate change, and feeling stuck because it didn't seem to help our lands and people as much as hoped. So this tool really helped to bring a solution to our struggles as Indigenous people facing climate change. And I think maybe that's, to elaborate a little bit on that, it's bringing that hope into, addressing climate change. Specifically, a lot of times climate change is presented as the dread and the doom and gloom and that end game over kind of thing. But I think this, thank you for sharing, Melanie. The TAM brings another aspect of hope to, face and deal with climate change and draw strength from your own nations and cultures.
If I could add something, I think one of the beauties of the TAM is that I'm realizing is that one of the first workshops I went to, many of the projects were land-based projects, but you can see that it can be used, and I'm seeing how well it could be used for educational projects. So it's really in itself very adaptable. And it also helps provide a framework for those who may not know where to start, who would like to look at climate change and responses in a different way than we normally think of in more Anglo societies, but they don't know where to start. And with the documentation of the TAM, that's available, and the help from the TAM team is available in such a good way. And I think that gives people confidence to look at this issue through different ways and more holistically than maybe what they have had an opportunity in the past.
I'm going to jump in and just reiterate that I agree with Kat and on what she just said. I'd like to also add something I didn't say or get a chance to say earlier. When we started doing the planting at the wetland site, the majority of the plants that we used was provided by the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, and at no cost. And it was almost 1,000 plants that were definitely locally harvested, the seeds. So they were truly Oklahoma native pollinator plants. And I see that Colin, I don't want to put you on the spot, Colin, but I see Colin Spriggs is on here and he was over there. He helped us, brought over the plants and helped us, get those installed and planted. And that was a job, because I started calling that soil over there the concrete dirt. So it had such high clay content, it was horrible to try to get through. But going back to what Kat said, with climate change still being such a controversial issue to talk about, even within tribes somehow, I think the TAM approach and using that as a guide for projects, even for small projects like what I had, which, I know a lot of you guys are working on thousands of acres or hectares, and, and I'm on this small 1/4 of an acre educational site, but it still worked. And it's kind of like, if you can't get in through the front door, sneak around and come in through the back. And you don't have to, you can use this document as a guide for whatever your project is, and you're still getting to the same destination. And it's just another beauty of this document, I think. So
yeah, I just wanted to make I guess a quick note about where I see the TAM going in the future as well. And I know we've had people requesting the TAM team for workshops addressing public health as well. And so it's not just a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
The structure of it, I think, can be utilized for just about any situation that you can think of. And I guess that's sort of the product of a holistic approach. That approach is still valid and relevant to so many other aspects of our existence, that the TAM can still be used for something maybe not directly related to climate change, maybe not something directly related to natural resources per se, but just that approach and that engagement, and getting the community involved, and thinking about old stories and traditional values and stuff like that, and allowing those things to come forward again to help guide us, I think, is where I see in the future, this could still be applicable.
Well, and to flip that on its head and to understand that those are all absolutely vital and necessary to understand as we have this conversation about climate change. They're not things that you can isolate and separate, which has been a major conversation in the development of this menu, and in the trainings and the workshops and the ongoing conversations, that these aren't one and dones. These aren't things that are separated out. These aren't things that are one-dimensional. Exactly. And when you're talking about these changes, when you're talking about the work that we're doing, we're talking about health, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about education, we're talking about on and on and on, science, resources, everything that you could imagine will come up in those conversations. And when we change these conversations and allow that framework to be so holistic and to carry that weight in that way, we are able then to walk forward in a way that so many people, that's what people are seeking. People are looking for this way to talk. And that's the most beautiful and wonderful thing about everything that's been taken, everything that's been then displaced or moved as Anishinaabe or Indigenous people here on these lands. We have been able to, we still have some of that understanding and that knowledge. And so therefore these conversations are still possible right now, right here today, as we're walking forward. We can have those conversations because you still have people here tied to that understanding. And we're grateful. We're all really grateful to be able to be
and even like going off of what Yvette had said too, and the fact that she has thought this way, right? And she's had this way of seeing things, but not really feeling the liberty to talk that way. And I know she's not the only one. And, I was one of those people as well for a long time. And, I think the intention of the document was to give license and parity to the natural world. But I think in a way we've also unlocked and given license to other human beings like ourselves to express ourselves in that way without feeling othered, or being labeled as the hippie tree hugger or whatever else crap that people pop around out there. But no, there's other people that think like this, and it's legit. So yeah,
just wanted to share real quick, since kind of getting close towards the end. Thank you, Melanie, for posting. So there's a link to the document, the Tribal Adaptation Menu document, so that's in the chat. And also Sarah, thank you, also put the session evaluation survey. So that link is also in the chat. So if you have a moment, please find those. And just wanted to share that. And I think I don't see any other questions other than Miigwech. Thank you. Also say Katapatanamu. Thank you for this panel. So that pass it over to you, Rob. That's what I see in the chat. Thank you.
So yeah, that brings us to the end of our time today. I just want to say Miigwech to my TAM fam for stepping in when I got drafted to do this at the last minute. Y'all saved my ass, thank you. And also for all of your words, and to those of you who joined us today, Miigwech for coming.